welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Today's a special episode and it's in response to Foodie Laura's allotment challenge, so I'll be doing that today. Welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. So as I've explained, Foodie Laura has put out a few questions on her channel as an allotment, and I'd basically just like to go through those questions and give you sort of my answers to them, if you like. So the first question was, how long have you had your allotment? This particular allotment I've had for 11 years, however, the one that's almost opposite, it's just off to the left, I had that for about 6 years before that. The next question is, how long did you have to wait for your allotment? The one that was opposite, I waited. I pretty much got straight onto that. This one that I've got now, I had to wait for almost 4 years to get. It was well worth the wait, but yeah, it basically took 4 years. My name was on the list to have this one for about 4 years before I actually got it. Next question was, where did you learn about gardening? I kind of grew up with gardening. My father was born during the Second World War, and then it was the UK was basically rationed for quite a few years afterwards. So he kind of grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, which is in Staffordshire, which is the north part of the Midlands in the UK. And he had an allotment from a very early age. He was only about 8 or 9 years old or something like that, and he was gardening basically all through his life. Now, when I grew up in Wolverhampton, which is also in the Midlands, and all through my life I've always known my father to have either an allotment or a large garden. So up until the age of 12, I lived in Wolverhampton, and my dad had an allotment there, and I used to help him sort of do that as I grew up, and so I learnt a lot of things from my father, how to do things. And then my parents moved when I was 12 to a house with a considerably bigger garden, and basically they didn't need an allotment then because they already had a massive vegetable patch on the side of the house, half of which I looked after, and my dad looked after the other sort of half or so. I've had I've been gardening all my life pretty much, and so I've always had an interest in it, and I've picked by far majority up off my father and other friends as I was growing up. Do you plant a winter garden is the next question. No, the reason being, I do have crops in the allotment. I have leeks, I have purple sprouting broccoli, I have parsnips, and I have swede and things like that, which I do eat during the winter. I'll leave them in the ground and then I eat them as and when. But the thing that I do find difficult, if you like, is rotating crops if I have winter vegetables. What I like to have is in the spring is to have a clean sheet, absolutely nothing in the allotment, so I can rotate things around and do it that way. However, having said that, I do grow certain crops through the winter, like the purple sprouting broccoli, like perpetual spinach. I'll leave that in the garden and I'll be cropping that again in the spring. But as such, no, I don't grow vegetables in the winter. Where we are here is quite exposed, so I've got nothing but fields for 7 miles in that direction, and the wind does really blow through here, and it also gets reasonably wet in this part of Britain. So crops don't grow particularly well in the winter here. I do get a reasonable amount of waterlogging down the bottom half of the allotment, so that's pretty much out of the picture for the winter. And in this top half here, I normally like to keep this clear. I have grown things like winter onions in the past, but because you crop winter onions in June, that's kind of after you want to put you want to put your normal onions in, if you like, in sort of I don't know, April time. So the two overlap. So really, that's why I don't like sort of growing both, because you get this sort of crossover period where you're trying to shuffle things around and you can't get your main crops in during the summer. So what I tend to do is not grow that much during the winter, and then I concentrate on the the summer crops, because that's where I can grow the maximum amount of yield. And because I grow things in quite large blocks, half the allotment is potatoes and stuff like that, I tend to find growing other crops during the winter is either takes up room and is in the way in the spring, or the faster moving stuff doesn't tend to grow that well. I do grow a bit of winter salad, but again, that's that's short-lived stuff. But yeah, I don't typically grow a winter garden. The biggest success this year is the next question. The biggest success I think I've had this year, more than normal, is the brassicas. The broccoli I've had almost twice as much as I normally have out of the same amount of space. So that's done really well this year. The potato crop's been pretty good this year. But I would say the biggest success this year, if I was to put, if I was to say one thing, I'd say the broccoli has most certainly done really well this year. The next thing is your biggest disaster. There's a list here. As you can imagine, I've been gardening for the best part of 40 years, and in that time I've had a reasonable amount of disasters. The three I've been thinking about this one. There's three things that really stand out to me. The first one, which was quite a few years ago, I'm going back sort of 25 years or so, I used to grow a lot of fuchsias, and I used to grow standard fuchsias, which is basically a plant which is I don't know, about 4 foot, half standard fuchsias, so they're about 4 foot high. And what you do is you grow a single stalk, and then on the top you have like a pom-pom of growth, if you like, and then it tends to sort of you let the branches go down, so it kind of cascades down, if you like. And I'd been growing this particular variety, which was a real favourite of mine, and it's not the easiest fuchsia to grow in a standard. Some fuchsias are quite quick growing, some are slow growing. This was a particularly slow growing one, and it took ages to grow. So the first year, basically you grow the stalk. The second year you grow the head, and then it's the third year really when it really comes into its own. And I've been growing this thing for 2 years. I'd grown the stalk, and I'd nurtured this thing and really looked after it. And then I'd grown the head and really looked after it. And you can lose them in the winter. You need to lie them on the side so that the sap doesn't go down. I don't want to go into the complexities of it, but anyway, I'd grown this plant. It had taken me 3 years to grow it, and it had just come into bloom, and I was as proud as punch with this standing, because I didn't think I'd actually do it in the end, but I'd been growing it for 3 years. It was the third season. It was all in flower, and I put it in the garden in pride of place, and the dog ran through it and snapped it off at the bottom. I can't explain how gutted I was when that happened, but anyway, that was one real disaster. The next disaster was about 8 years ago, and I grew a load of potatoes in the allotment, and I can't remember. There was a couple of varieties. King Edward's was one. There was another one as well. And it was, the problem I had was the varieties that I'd used weren't particularly slug resistant, and also we'd had a particularly wet season. And when it came to sort of August, September time to dig the potatoes out, I dug the potatoes out, and almost every potato had got slug damage, and the slugs just absolutely, absolutely destroyed the crop, and that was basically half the allotment. So I'd got half the allotment, and it was absolutely heartbreaking digging all the potatoes out, and pretty much every potato that I dug out, the potatoes were nice size, but every potato was absolutely riddled with slugs, so you just couldn't eat them. And I tried to salvage as much as I could, but it was an absolute nightmare. But yeah, I think that was a really big disaster. The third one that sprung to mind was I tried to grow a pumpkin last year. I don't know if you remember, but it was at the back here, and I'd got it in this bin here, and I'd lovingly filled the bin with my best compost, chicken manure, fertiliser. I'd got it all really nice. I thought this pumpkin's going to be absolutely fantastic, and I grew a giant pumpkin plant and planted it in there, and I nurtured this thing, and the pumpkin, I'm not joking you, the pumpkin was about that big. And I thought, after all that bother, you know, watering it every day and going to all that bother, and I ended up with a pumpkin that big, which is about as big as a pumpkin you get if you just throw the seed on the ground and left it to it, sort of thing. So, you know, I was trying to grow a massive pumpkin, and it just didn't happen. Okay, so question number 7 relates back to the other that I was saying, just the biggest disaster. But the one variety, do you have a tried and tested variety that you would recommend? Kestrel potatoes is most certainly the one that I'd recommend. As I say, after the disaster I had with all the slugs and all the rest of it, I was advised by a number of people actually to use Kestrel, because basically they're considerably more slug resistant, if you like. And so I've grown Kestrel ever since, and I always get a really good crop and then a really nice potato for a number of reasons. So I always grow Kestrel potatoes. I don't grow any other variety other than Kestrel, and I find that suits the ground really well. I get a really good crop, and I don't get any slug damage. So potato variety that I would recommend is Kestrel. The next one is, will you try anything new next year? I've got a few things that I want to try next year, to be honest with you, that I've not grown for a while or not before. Most certainly ginger I will try to grow again. I'm going to have a better go at the sweet potatoes. And Foodie Laura actually said that she was going to try sweet potatoes next year. They're not best suited to British weather, I think, but most certainly if I grow sweet potatoes next year, I'm going to grow them very differently to the way I did it this year. And I think what I'd also like to grow next year are some different brassicas rather than the ones that I've grown recently. The curly kale and the Nero kale is a good crop, but the Nero kale, I don't think I'll grow that again, to be honest with you. But what I would like to do is try some brassicas with regard to things like chard and things like that. I think I have grown rainbow chard before and Swiss chard, and I think I'd like to grow some more of those types of vegetables next year, because I think they come in the kitchen. So yeah, so things like that I'm going to try and grow next year. Next one is preserving crops. How do you do it? I'm not one to. In the past, I've made loads of jams and stuff like that, and I have actually had to go to a few chutneys as well. The last couple of years I've not grown many jams, made many jams, purely because we just don't get through it in the house. The only real time that we eat jam is when we make cakes and stuff like that. And because I get given so much by my parents and stuff like that, I tend to find that what they give me is more than enough to sort of keep us going. So the fruit we tend to eat as and when it's ready, fresh off the plant, and also the things like the strawberries and stuff like that we always just eat fresh. The one thing that we have done with strawberries is make freezer jam, and basically all you do is you just boil up the strawberries, add your Certo, let it cool, and then you freeze it in the fridge. And I've got probably about 4 or 5 kilos of that in the freezer now. And we tend to use it. What you can do is I freeze it in blocks, and what you can do is chop off a bit of that, let it defrost, and you can use that as sauces on ice creams and stuff like that. So that's quite nice. But the main crops that I basically store are potatoes, and basically I've shown you how to do that. But basically you dig your potatoes up, let them dry in the sun ideally, if you've got the weather. As soon as they've dried off, you put them in the shed, let the skins of the potatoes harden off, so it protects them, and then bag them all up. Onions, as I've shown you, I dry them in the sun and let them sort of dry out for a month or so and then I string them up. So that's another way to preserve. All of the other stuff, pretty much, I eat it fresh off the allotment. A lot of stuff I'll leave in the ground until I need it. So things like the parsnips and that, I will just leave them in the ground until I want to eat them, and I dig them up as and when I need them. Pumpkins and squashes and stuff, what you can do is chop them up and freeze them. And other things like rhubarb and stuff, you can chop that up and freeze it, or you can make jams with it and stuff, all the rest of it. But I typically use that. I've only got a certain amount of freezer space that I can use, and what I don't want to do is pack the freezer full of all sorts of stuff. The one thing that the freezer is full of at the moment is runner beans, and what I always do is I pick about 10 kilos of runner beans in a go. Chop all them up, I quickly blanch them, and then I freeze them in bags. I freeze them in 1 kilo bags, and I've got, this year I've frozen, I think it was 50 something bags of, so 50 something kilos of beans. And we've also eaten loads of fresh off the plant themselves during the summer. But yeah, that's the other big one. I freeze about 50 odd kilos of beans every year, and that lasts me all the way through till they start to crop next year. Favourite meals to be cooked from the allotment? To be honest with you, the one thing that I really enjoy more than anything is a jacky potato, kestrel potatoes. Basically just straight out the ground, wash them, get them nice and clean, wrap them up in some silver foil, chuck them in the oven for 40 minutes, and a bit of butter and some cheese on there. You can't beat it. To be honest with you, that's my favourite thing to eat off the allotment, if I'm being absolutely honest. I do cook a lot of stuff with the tomatoes. I do a lot of curries. I do a lot of spaghetti bolognese, chilies, things like that. But it's just nice to eat fresh vegetables off your allotments. I think that's one of the main driving forces behind doing allotments, is just to have nice fresh vegetables that they've got no pesticides or anything nasty on them, and just cook it fresh. So it's nice to have the asparagus in the spring, with just very quickly blanched, or just boiled for a few moments, or even griddled or whatever, and then just a nice knob of butter on there. Nice and simple, fresh out of the garden. You can't beat it. It's nice to eat the fruit straight off the plants. But my number one, if I was to pick one, is a nice jacky potato that you've grown yourself, that's come straight out of the ground, straight onto your plate. And I don't think the sense of achievement that you get when you think you can sit down on a Sunday and you've got 4 or 5 vegetables on the plate, and you can think an hour and a half ago all of this was growing in the garden. And you just can't beat it, really. That's a real driving force for me. But I just like cooking my own vegetables. There's nothing nicer than having that feeling of sort of growing things together. But anyway, that's the answers to Laura's allotment challenge. And thank you for putting the questions up, Laura. I do appreciate that, and thank you for all the videos that you put as well. What I'm going to do, Laura, is I've got another 10 questions that I've come up with, so I'm going to do a part 2 to your questions, if you don't mind. I'm going to put that in the next episode, but I've got 10 questions that I've come up with that kind of augment your questions, if you like. But anyway, that was in response to Foodie Laura's allotment challenge. So I hope this episode has been of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments or questions that you've got below, and I'll always get back to you. And I'll see you in the next episode of Jim's Not McCarthy.